Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the Journey of Development's program on engaged workforce. The goal for our program is to facilitate a meaningful learning experience and a discussion that is engaging and insightful. The format will allow each panelist to share their unique perspective on the topic of employee engagement. Once each of our panelists share their experience and insights, we'll open up to the audience for questions. Before we start with our panelists, I would like to introduce myself and Scrimmage. As a continuous learner, I feel engaged and empowered, learning from the experience and wisdom of others, and created the Journey of Development as a way for me to continue my own personal development while supporting others with their development and growth. As Director of Business Development for Scrimmage, I work with organizations to support the employee journey from onboarding through their entire life cycle. Scrimmage is not only an early innovator of technology, but also a leader in the field. Our award-winning platform is a secure enterprise mobility ecosystem built to engage, motivate, and create connection across the organization while delivering greater proficiencies and overall work performance. You can check us out at wescrimmage.com or let me know if you're interested in learning the results you can achieve with Scrimmage after our program today. Our first panelist is Dr. Marina Theodotou. Marina is an organizational change expert working at the intersection of learning, defense acquisition, and digitization to drive the customer mission. She is a learning support faculty at the Defense Acquisition University. Marina is a recognized thought leader in learning and development and contributes through talks and articles extensively for Chief Learning Officer magazine, ATD, and the training industry. She holds a doctorate in education from the University of Southern California. With that, Marina, would you like to take it away and share your perspective and insights?
I would love to. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much, Nicole, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, along with my colleagues, Rachel Zwell and Bodensiek. I look forward to discussing with you today some of the fundamentals around how do we keep the workforce engaged. As Nicole mentioned, I work for the Defense Acquisition University, and today I'm going to share with you 3 steps to building an enduring culture of learning, which is based on my doctoral research that is based on the Defense Acquisition University. So what I wanted to use as a preamble is a specific data point that PricewaterhouseCoopers shared in a recent report, as well as a LinkedIn number. So PricewaterhouseCoopers said that 75% of CEOs are concerned about the engagement of their workforce. And LinkedIn in 2016, in a report, they actually put a price on the disengagement of an employee, and it can be as high as $50,000 per year. So today we're going to go a little bit further back and think about not only how to create, not about creating a band-aid, how do we engage the workforce on the spot, but how do we build an enduring learning culture. So with that, Nicole, we can go to the next slide, please. So the first step is to foster confidence, creativity, and commitment in your L&D team. And what do we mean by that? Well, this step and all of the 3 steps that I'm sharing with you today are actually based on the research that I did for the defense for my doctoral dissertation, focusing on the Defense Acquisition University. So I went back and looked at 15 years of history and practices that DAU has completed. And for those of you that may not be familiar with the Defense Acquisition University, it is a university at the Department of Defense of the United States that provides a global learning environment to develop qualified acquisition requirements and contingency professionals with all the capabilities and learning so that they can support the warfighter. So you may, if you read the Chief Learning Officer magazine, which is one of the publications in our industry, you may have come across the name DAU. They actually won the Golden elite award last year. And in fact, the last 15 years, DAU has won 70 awards from ATD, from CLO, from training industry, Brandon Hall, etc. So I was very intrigued to actually study how did they build this enduring learning culture, and how were they able to align learning to results. So what I'm sharing today are these distilled 3 steps. Clearly, you don't want to delve into all the research and analysis. So let's go to the first step. As I mentioned earlier, foster confidence, creativity, and commitment in your L&D team. And this may sound very basic, but actually it's quite difficult to achieve. So starting with why. I don't know how many of you have read Simon Sinek's book or have seen his TED Talk, but that's one of my favorite actually go-tos when I think about leadership and I think about how do I inspire a team. So starting with why can be implemented by brainstorming and training sessions to empower and enable your teams to define their organizational values. So the why. So every individual on the team needs to know the why, but the team in the learning and development team needs to be crystal clear. What is our why? Why are we here? What are we trying to do for our organization? So the next component to this is encouraging creative and innovative problem solving. That's actually, excuse me, I have my little dog here. I'll have to pick her up. So empowering our teams to think innovatively and creatively through design thinking and agile training sessions. A lot of organizations are implementing agile, and I know we are in my directorate at the Defense Acquisition University, and I'm seeing a lot of great changes in the way we think about problems and the way we think about the customer and the way we design and come up with creative solutions. During the discussion, I'd like to hear how many of you are actually familiar in implementing Agile in your organizations. The third component here is communicate openly, which is critical, and sometimes we take it for granted, but fostering open communication about successes and challenges alike is critical in every change effort. And the fourth step here is hiring, developing, and retaining great people. Again, this may seem quite basic, but revamping our hiring process and ensuring that we invest in the L&D team can actually help strengthen the confidence, creativity, and commitment in your L&D team. And we can go to the next step, please. Thank you. So the second step is aligning strategy, resources, and metrics to the CEO agenda. Here, it's important to develop an enterprise-wide strategy and provide your team with training sessions and tools on how to develop a strategy, including conducting SWOT analysis and setting SMART goals. It's so critical. In my research, I found that one of the biggest gaps that L&D teams have is the inability to get a seat at the table with the C-suite, the inability to be heard, and that actually goes back to our difficulty in developing an enterprise-wide strategy that really focuses on what the organization needs. Most oftentimes in L&D, we think about, oh, we have this budget, if we're lucky to get it, and we can deliver this training. And now I'm not speaking about DAU, I'm speaking for L&D in general. So it's critical for the L&D team to be able to set a enterprise-wide strategy around learning. And the next step here is collecting the correct data. One of the significant items that I found in the literature while doing my research is that L&D organizations are measuring the wrong things. And we know that there are several models out there relating to measuring and monitoring results. And the one that's most applied the most is the Kirkpatrick New World model. So collecting the correct data for your organization is critical to be able to align your strategy and the resources and the metrics to the CEO agenda. So the final step here is, once you develop your strategic plan, meaning this is what we're going to do for learning for this organization, for our organization for this year, and these are the things we're going to measure to know that in a year from now we've succeeded, you actually have to make sure that you speak with the C-suite and the CEO and make sure that what you're proposing as your learning plan actually aligns one-for-one with the priorities of the organization. If that's not done, then you're going to have a gap and lots of difficulties in creating that learning culture. And now we can go to the third step, please, the next slide. So the third slide is cultivating a continuous improvement. So here we have 3 recommendations. The first one relates to benchmarking. And I'd like to know at the end of our presentations during the discussion, if any of you have engaged in benchmarking, which is critical because it allows you to learn the process of benchmarking and then compare and learn from the best companies inside and outside your industry to glean, adapt and adapt best practices for your L&D strategy. So I found a long time ago, I used to work for Bank of America, and I worked in one of my roles. My last role there was in strategic benchmarking, and it was incredible at that time. This is the early 2000s, that a bank was actually benchmarking with organizations like the Ritz-Carlton for customer service. Our focus was customer satisfaction and customer service. So we benchmarked with the Ritz-Carlton, with Starbucks, and Disney. At that time, those 3 companies were leading in customer service and customer focus. And it was incredible how much we learned just going outside the industry. And engaging in benchmarking is something that the DAU has done really well and has actually benchmarked with other organizations outside the defense industry, including Qualcomm and Deloitte. And this has helped. These are 2 examples of benchmarking that DAU has applied. The second component here is seeking accreditation, and this is more applicable to corporate universities, but seeking accreditation actually is a very rigorous process. It can take up to 2 years for the organization to be able to respond to all the different questions or requirements that an accrediting body requires. But it is an excellent exercise to improve all of your internal processes and really align your learning to business performance results and actually demonstrate that you have a learning culture at your organization. And finally, this last step, applying for industry awards, is similar to seeking accreditation. If your organization does not have a corporate university, then you can apply for industry awards, whether with ATD or Chief Learning Officer or Brandon Hall. There are several. I'm not pointing out any particular one, but our industry has several rigorous awards, and the key point here is not to earn the award, it's actually to hold the mirror to your organization so that you can actually dig deep and evaluate all your practices as they relate to learning and development and how those align with your overall organizational strategy. And you will find, as research shows, and my particular research showed, that this is a great opportunity and a great way to get serious about your learning and development strategy, which actually leads to highlighting and underscoring within your organization that you are serious about your learning and development approach and your efforts to build a learning culture within your organization. So with this, I conclude my comments, and the last and final slide, if we could go to the next slide, I provide you with my contacts as well as the link to my latest article that actually discusses this approach. It's in the November edition of the Talent Development magazine. Thank you.
Marina. Our next panelist is Ed. Before serving as the Chief Experience Officer in Law, Ed worked as VP of Brand and Communications for Select Medical, a $5 billion company where he also led patient and employee experience. To help bring more humanity to how we work and interact with customers and colleagues, in 2018, Ed founded an experience design firm called Cravety. Through cultural analytics and design thinking and agile, Ed helps clients design brands from the inside out, reoriented from around the customer and employee journey. Ed has held director-level roles with Johns Hopkins University, the Fulbright Scholar Program, and the U.S. Treasury. Today, Ed is also host of the X-Dive Live Show, a podcast about the human experience in the workplace. With that, Ed, are you ready to share your insights and experience?
I am. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Sure. Thanks so much for that, Nicole. And Marina, you set this up absolutely perfectly. So can you see my screen before I get going?
Yes.
Great. Super. So just a quick introduction. So thank you for that. We're a very different kind of agency, and I want to back my way into talking about employee engagement and the metrics that we use and what we're seeing. I want to back my way into it in this sense. We start at a very different place, and what I'd like to share with you today is just this really simple idea of loving your work and knowing that creating that happiness in the workplace, happy talent, really resulting in happy customers. And so we use our terms very differently. You'll hear us talk about brand in a non-traditional way. Most people right away are going to think about the traditional kind of Mad Men era of advertising, right? And you think about your graphics and your messages and your logos and that kind of thing. And we take that to mean something very, very different. And so to talk about employee engagement and how we measure that, I first want to talk about the single most powerful force that affects not just what we buy from and from whom, but really where we work and for how long. And this won't come as a surprise to you, but just to kind of set the stage a bit. And of course, that's emotion. We're irrational creatures as humans. And so first, a quick definition. I'm not a researcher. I'm a commercial practitioner. I fell into this work completely by accident. And I did that because I came up through the marketing and communications track. And for a couple decades, I was plodding along, however, getting pretty frustrated at one point. I distinctly remember I made the move from the Fulbright program to the for-profit healthcare space. The first time in that particular vertical, I realized, wow, my traditional toolkit is no longer working to create this great reputation and to create demand. And that's where, when you come from the place that I do, marketing side, of course, that's what you're trained to do and what you're hired to do. Except what I found was that we were getting blasted by our own employees and ex-employees on sites like Glassdoor. This is back in 2011. We're getting blasted by patients and referral sources in many cases on these new third-party review sites. Yelp had added a healthcare category, healthgrades.com, and on and on. And of course, social media. And so what we realized was word of mouth had been weaponized. And until we got more intentional about the root causes of why people were having these sometimes pretty terrible experiences, employees and quote unquote customers, in this case, again, patients and referral sources, until we struck at the root of that, those classic tools in the toolkit were simply not going to work. And so we had to figure out how to partner. I was head of comms and brand, partner with HR and the entire organization within a very large company to see how can we create a better experience. And I would tell you that we failed in the first year because we started thinking first about just the outwardly focused part of this, the patient experience and the bedside manner and what the facilities look like. And we thought, and we kind of were onto something, but we were missing this huge, huge piece, which in hindsight, of course, is staggeringly obvious. And that was the employee experience. And we discovered, for example, nurses who said, you know, and I don't mean to be too colorful here today, but hopefully we've all had our coffee and we're already awake, but would say things like, you know, SOBs are so cheap, you know, the scrubs that you gave us are so thin, these, the embroidery on our logo, the logo is like irritating us. And we have these workarounds, like these Band-Aids in some cases we discovered underneath their scrubs. It's really awful. And so as we got more intentional looking at this, we realized that was holding us back, obviously, right? No rocket science there, from a better employee experience and thus getting less and less engaged. And so we discovered, as we got closer and closer to this, looking at it more closely, more than 100 things like that. And so I present to you some definitions between what makes a good brand experience, and again, I'm using that very deliberately, very differently, versus a bad one. And this is both for customers and employees. And here's why it's for both. Because you only get one reputation. When Samsung had its famous now recall of the Galaxy smartphone, it didn't just affect their ability to attract new customers for a time, it affected their ability to attract talented software engineers. People want to buy from the same places, and I'm generalizing, that you also want to work for. So they're linked. So defining a good experience, and we'll get the employee engagement piece of this more specifically, setting the stage like this. A good brand experience is the degree of problem solved, that functional competence every organization has, and wouldn't be in business, whether it's for profit, nonprofit, higher ed, whatever, if you didn't solve some kind of problem. We know that. Like the 1.0 world just focuses on that piece. It's also the degree of the pain points involved. And then finally, back to that emotion piece, how good a customer, external or internal, actually feels about you. And us figuring out as a community, learning from each other the ways and the methodologies to actually operationalize things like empathy. And so I present to you a suggested formula, which would be that your customer experience plus your employee experience would equal that brand experience. And it's why any kind of, Marina mentioned design thinking before. I'm sure many of you in this community are very well aware of what that is, and perhaps are practitioners of that yourself. We apply that right away to on the inside, knowing that what you get on the inside, you get on the outside. And so one thing I can share is, an observation, I run a design, co-facilitate a design lab for employee experience. And it's really interesting because we have people from the traditional marketing world coming to those, as well as those from more traditional OD and HR backgrounds. And that's interesting to me because there's this Venn diagram that's being created where they're learning, these worlds are learning from each other. And in some ways, I'm not sure it'll become a full circle or anything, but it might way down the road, but for now, they are touching each other, I think, in new ways and learning from each other. And so keep that in mind as you think about the sequence to create a brand experience, which I'm going to show you leads to very powerful employee engagement. And that is, think of this first. Your organization's value, that is your brand value, is a function of how much trust people place in your organization. And that trust is determined by the actual experiences people have with your brand, what we just covered. The experience, though, is a sum total of every single interaction that people have with your brand. And that's why things are changing and why I think these many worlds are converging. As people get much more intentional about how to think about this with some systems thinking, more end-to-end, and taking that journey through what it's like to experience organization. So again, start at a very, very different place. And of course, we've been giving lip service to culture for a long time. So I want to kind of pivot towards my last key points in our brief time here with you today. And I'd encourage you to take this poll. And I'd love to know how many of you are not at all familiar with human-centered design thinking, maybe reading about it, not doing it. Those of you who are designing this way and actively implementing employee experience, which I use interchangeably with human-centered design, so that's really what that should be about. Okay, so when you think about experiential approaches to an organization, we think about it like a platform, like an operating system, and it's aligning these key things. And conveniently, because I have a marketing background, not coincidentally, we found a way to make them all start with the letter P. But it's easy to remember, and it's just, it starts, I think, on the inside. And that's with aligning the people, that the vision, the mission, the purpose, those, what some others in the C-suite have called those soft, fluffy things are actually pretty darn important. The why, and we mentioned, the relevant book, Seth's book, today. So true. Start with the people, then look at the place. What's it like to experience the surroundings of your brick and mortar, to enter into a place? Policies and process. Is it designed to be just functionally based? Are you taking into account the emotional competence that people expect now from many organizations, no matter what sector you're in? And then the product. And the last thing, and this is the great irony, because remember how I started in marketing and comms in my career, then the public persona. Go to market last if you can. Get the experience correct so that when people are having those conversations about you, it's all in place and it's authentic and not just more lip service. So I would end with this. And that is, like I mentioned, we've been giving lip service to culture for many, many years. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how to get more intentional about treating culture like the operating system that it really is. How intentional are we being as a community, looking for meaningful patterns and gaps, but at the behavioral level, what's it like to really experience this? And if you start having those conversations, you think about employee engagement in a very different way, because then there's less of a reliance on surveys, employee engagement surveys, which if you think about it are really more of a lagging indicator. It's already happened. Worst of all, we know 47%, according to the 2017 Global Trends Survey, 47% of HR leaders surveyed say or admit that they do nothing at all. They don't do anything with the results of those employee engagement surveys, which it further demotivates and disengages employees. Versus that lagging indicator versus the leading indicator is something very new that we're getting really excited about, and that is cultural analytics. Measuring what goes into the culture on the front end, figuring out what are the behaviors you want more of to drive the organization forward versus what are the behaviors you want less of. So I'm happy to talk more about that, but I don't want to take too much time in my allotted 10 minutes, but some food for thought as we have this interesting conversation here today.
The poll results are 75% not at all familiar with human-centered design thinking and employee experience strategy, and 25% are saying actively implementing experience in the employee experience. So looks like most of our attendees do not have familiarity in this world. Yeah,
that's actually the 25% that are. It's actually higher that we see in the general marketplace. So I'm not surprised by that, but I can certainly talk more about that and how that approach, human-centered design approach, can lead to the engagement we all want. It's a very deliberate way to do it in terms of how you design something. The agile piece we talked about earlier is what we use, what many are using to implement all those great ideas. We find 9 to 12 months to actually start moving the needle. And that's exciting because the big knock we're getting on employee engagement, right, for years has been, so you get these surveys and what do you do with it? And I think some of that's been well-deserved.
Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Rachel Zwell, is an Emergence coach and the speaking and enrollment manager at the Wright Foundation for the Realization of Human Potential. As a coach, she specializes in empowering her clients to increase fulfillment and satisfaction in their lives to achieve their professional and personal goals. Rachel believes in full engagement and aliveness and trains people to see and overcome the barriers that prevent them from reaching their fullest potential. As the enrollment manager, Rachel is responsible for client engagement and growing the Wright Foundation through increasing community and staff engagement, speaking appearances, and networking. Rachel, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. So I was hoping that we could put my my face big on this big screen here, because I'm just going to talk to you. Well, as Nicole said, and thank you so much, Nicole, I am the events manager. I am the enrollment manager and the speaking manager at the Wright Foundation for the realization of human potential, as well as a coach. And I'm going to speak to you from my perspective in that workforce, which is a very engaged workforce. So, we are, well, what we do, let me tell you a little bit about the Wright Foundation, is we do social and emotional intelligence training and leadership training. So really what we do is individual coaching, seminars. We have a graduate university as well, where we do master's and doctoral degrees in transformational leadership and coaching. And we also do speaking and consulting in organizations. And the way that our business operates, and excuse me, I've got a little throat thing as well. The way that we operate is with a system called open book management. We're a small staff of about 25, and the way that we operate our business has been hugely beneficial to me, and has really helped me be more engaged and learn quite a bit more about business than I knew previously. I've been in this company for about 5 years. And the way that we run the business is basically that we have everybody in the business taking ownership of different aspects of the business, and really engaging our individual employees there. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the different tools that we use for employee engagement at the Wright Foundation. And so I actually was wanting to share with you one of the things that came out of actually our all staff meeting that we just had this past Tuesday as an example. One of I would say the key most important thing in my experience with engagement is that every individual in the company really is that they are considering what's going on in meetings, what's going on in the company, that they're really applying this, and actively using and participating in meetings, rather than as sort of a didactic leader tells you what's going to happen, leader tells you what your goals are, and you move forward with those goals. So we have a weekly staff meeting. This is our whole staff of 25 people. And what we're actually in the process of doing as a part of this open book management is planning the goals that we're going to be going for in 2019. And so rather than it being the CEO, the president, and the COO who come up with these goals and just tell us what it is that we're going to do, I'm the sales and enrollment manager. So that's in previous positions, that's the way that it worked, is I was told, here's what you need to go for. We actually have a culture where everybody in the company is responsible for coming up with these goals and the plan and actually how we're going to get there. And the way that we do that is of course, there's always going to be some extent of the senior staff has goals and what they're going for, but we really invite active engagement from all the employees to figure out how it is that we're going to get there. And after a particularly challenging portion of this meeting on Tuesday, our CEO stopped the meeting and he used one of our tools for engagement, which is called paired sharing. And I'm sure everyone here has been in the kind of meeting where you're sitting back and listening, but you're pretty much actually zoning out and you're not really actively engaged in that meeting. Well, the way that we get people to really engage in our meetings and our processes is that we actually stop and we do this paired share. And what that looks like is you pair up with one or two other people, and then each person has 1 minute to actually process and talk and speak out loud about what they're learning. And so in this particular instance, we did groups of 3. When you have groups of 3 people, it encourages creative thinking. If you do a group of 2, it's a more stable grouping and you're more likely to get an agreement, which is also useful. But what we were really looking for is to have every individual, from an intern who just graduated college to our COO and president and CEO, to be looking at this plan that we'd made for 2019 for our business and seeing, does this work? Are there problems with it? How can we improve it? And so that really leads to everybody, regardless of their level or their formal position, getting very much engaged in the business. And I want to share with you a personal example, from my own career at this company. As I said, I'm the enrollment manager and a coach at the Wright Foundation now. When I started out 5 years ago, I was the assistant to the CEO at the company. Now, most of the time, you would think an assistant to the CEO would be primarily responsible for scheduling, managing the CEO's, business and that kind of thing. However, in the way that being taught to be really engaged in the company, what it led to was me really critically looking at the CEO's calendar, what's going to be the best use of his time and how I can maximize his billing in order to best grow the business, even though I had no sales responsibilities at that time. Another example of that is we have a signature program that we do that's called the Year of Transformation, a social and emotional intelligence training program. We have an administrative coordinator of that program who is a woman recently graduated from college at the start of her career, no sales, experience or responsibilities really, but through our open book management, she is seeing how her impact on the students as an administrator, as a coordinator, is going to have bottom line results, and whether we retain those students or whether we lose them due to poor customer service. And even further than that, whether those students refer in others to come to our programs because they're so thrilled with their experience. So she's actively volunteering to solve problems with the intention of bringing in more students to the business, because we have a system where she can actually see how that impacts the bottom line in the business as a whole. So it's both more fun and exciting, and encourages those bottom line results, which is obviously what we're all looking for really with employee engagement. So another thing that I wanted to talk about here is another tool that we use is called a mini game. So excuse me. What we find is that games are a way to keep a workforce engaged and excited and moving towards something. And this is, we're still developing in our use of the open book management system. But we, in learning it, we've been developing and using these games. And an example of that is a game that we did in order to enroll into an emotional intelligence seminar, whereas previously it had been just the sales team who was enrolling into that seminar, which is 3 people of those 25. What we did is we got the whole 25-person staff engaged by creating a game and a group prize and a goal. We all together decided what that goal would be, how many people we were going to collectively enroll into that training, had a fun theme, and what we ended up doing is we ended up getting an office fish for the company. So we now have this fish tank and these fish that are a constant reminder of every employee's ability to impact the bottom line and to make a difference, even if they wouldn't have necessarily thought that they would. And what the research shows is that a group prize that's fun, even if it's not something financially significant, is much more effective in motivating than an individual incentive that puts one in front of the other. And there's one winner and one loser. You want to have contests where everybody can win and everybody can band together. So what I want to close with is talking about how we use and apply our curriculum of social and emotional intelligence with all our staff. And I loved, Ed, when you said early on that the primary aspect of employee engagement is emotion. And that's another thing where when the focus is really on inviting each individual employee to be a part of what the company is doing, to care about it, to really put in their ideas and their thoughts and their effort. You have people caring about what it is you're doing, and you have people emotionally invested. And so our staff is all trained in emotional intelligence. We actually have an educational tool called the Engagement Continuum, where we really teach about what it is to go from to go from being completely disengaged to really transformatively engaged, that we use in our seminars and our teachings with our students as well. So I guess that's where I'll stop, and I'll leave you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I love the different approaches on how everyone is working on engagement. For the attendees, if you have any questions, please submit them now, and we'll add them into our discussion, covering the full spectrum of that experience from that pre-hire all the way through. And I loved that you tied that into from the brand, from the customer side as well. We're hearing more and more of that on the sales side, and it was interesting that it was brought into the overall company discussion, because as I was looking at different authorities as far as how they're defining engagement, that spectrum is across the board on how they're measuring it and what they're actually putting into practice. So I'm wondering, for those that don't have any experience there, and I would like to start with Ed on this one, where do you suggest that they start from measuring it to know, where they're at and where they need to go?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So where we recommend most people start, where we recommend most people start is do an assessment. There's some great tools out there. I use one called WorkXO. There are others. Measure your culture on where it is. I talked about leading indicators versus lagging. Culture, figuring out what goes into your culture on the front end, I find to be much more preferable, because you can affect the outcomes a whole lot better. Versus an employee engagement survey, it's already happened, right? They're measuring like how they feel about their workplace, how engaged they feel. And then you get caught up in some of these silly scores that people chase. Like my least favorite is, do you have a best friend at work? We open ourselves up to CFO really giving us a hard time when we're trying to chase a score like that. Do we want friendly people at work? Do you want to make friends? Of course you do. But are you really moving heaven and earth to make sure that your score goes up on whether or not you have a best friend at work? You see how it gets kind of silly. So instead, on the cultural side, we look for about 8 culture markers, from agility to transparency to how solutions focused is the organization, how growth oriented is it. And what you can do is you come up with a score on that. And then you use the agile approach to activate some change. So let's go do something about it. It's a very, very different approach. Not very well known, but I think that's going to change, because I'm not sure employee engagement surveys are going to be around in their present form as prevalent as they are. I don't think they ever go away completely. And by the way, the net promoter score, the employee net promoter score for employees, that is something we continue to use. So that is a lagging indicator. But if you don't know what that is, that's the classic, would you recommend to a friend or colleague that they work here? I think that is a great question. So,
awesome. Marina, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, actually, I'm glad that Ed brought up some of the specific metrics, and we have seen in research that best practicing organizations are crystal clear on what metrics they are. As if you recall, that was one of the recommendations in the second step. You have to be very clear as to what metrics you are measuring, and the Net Promoter Score is important, because it's almost like a pulse check, right?
Mhm.
So you can ask your employees, would you recommend to others working here? So that's a pulse check. If people say yes, that means that they are leaning positively towards the organization. But you do have to dig deeper. You cannot just rely on that snapshot. You have to go deeper, and as Rachel mentioned, you have to figure out how to engage and make sure that the engagement is continuous, as opposed to snapshots here and there. Oh, we have to focus on employee engagement. Let's let's apply a particular process. Is what I really liked about Rachel's discussion points was that they are consistently focusing on employee engagement throughout the workday and throughout the week, and that's important. And actually, this ties back to the research that we've seen. And the third step that I shared, which is continuous improvement, you can benchmark with some of the best organizations. So there is I believe it's, I want to say it's, is it Forbes? Let me just check, but best organizations to work at. And there's an annual best organization to work for. So there are annual events or actually competitions that actually rank the best companies to work in 2018. And I'm looking at a CNBC article here, and this is Glassdoor's 10th annual list. So that goes back to my comments around continuous improvement. You can actually look up some of the best practicing organizations and call them up and find out what it is that they do, and you can actually benchmark with them to find out and share some of your experience and try to learn from them. There's a whole process behind that. And the Association for the APQC, the American Productivity and Quality Center, provides guidance on how to conduct benchmarking. So I recommend that.
Rachel, do you have any thoughts before we move on?
Excuse me, I'm certainly not an expert on benchmarking. However, when I'm thinking of implementation and starting out, what I was speaking about in terms of the open book management, which is how the Wright Foundation works. Obviously, not everybody listening is going to work for a company that operates that way and wouldn't have the ability to do that or shift it that way. So my thought is to start with implementing one or two tools. And really looking at how can you increase engagement in the meetings that you're involved in? How can you increase engagement among the leaders of your staff? And simply stopping and having them do more breaks in their meetings where they ask everybody to kind of share how they're processing the information. I think that's a great place to start.
I think I think that kind of dig in a little bit more. You mentioned when as you were talking about, much of what you guys are doing on the open book concept is that inviting. And I think that's a big thing that is missing in some organizations. Was that a big part of your transformation, changing to that inviting atmosphere where you're inviting people to the table to share their opinions, to be involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was there at the company in the transition into open book management, and we've always had these, weekly all-staff meetings. But I remember before we were doing open book management, in those meetings, it was primarily the CEO talking about his agendas and everybody else listening. There wasn't a lot of engagement. I certainly remember sitting in those meetings, waiting for them to be done at times, not knowing really what I could do to impact his agendas. And then with the shift towards, it's really the ownership that open book management, invites, but you can certainly facilitate that kind of ownership even without the, formal open book management system. Everybody is encouraged to own an aspect of the business, whether or not there's the sole, person responsible for making that business happen. For example, I am the head of our enrollment, so obviously that's my area. I've owned that line in our, in our board and our tracking of our business for quite a while. But this year I have an employee under me and she's owning that. Obviously I'm still ultimately responsible for the results that we get in that area, but her having that ownership now forces her to start thinking, wow, what can I really do to impact the bottom line rather than just following my instructions to make calls,
Certainly. Marina or Ed, do you have experience on how to really create that openness and encouragement and inviting into as part of that culture and a learning organization?
One thing comes to mind is to get more intentional about what motivates people, so that the one size fits all doesn't really work. And so we think about from how we deliver continuous performance improvement feedback to extrinsic versus intrinsic motivators. Sometimes we think, hey, we read an article, we should do a better job like recognizing people for a job well done. Well, that sounds great, except some people are not really motivated by that, especially if you do it in public. It can backfire, is one example. Other people might be intrinsically motivated by the desire for more empowerment, more autonomy. All those things I think can contribute to the right environment, engagement that you want, but to take the time to assess what intrinsically motivates people. It also is very new and cutting edge. It's exciting. I think there's a people revolution underway, and all these tools and methodologies are coming out for a reason. There's a lot of demand to pay much more attention to this. It's very exciting.
Marina, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
I do. Actually, I wanted to share that DAU has 900 employees. And actually what motivated me to actually join the organization, and I think it's so powerful because all of us are focusing on the mission, is the fact that if we don't, so DAU trains 160,000 acquisition workforce members at the Department of Defense. So essentially the acquisition process is the procurement process for everything the warfighter needs, from uniforms to aircraft carriers. So the learning that DAU provides, it's mission critical. If we don't provide good learning experiences, then our national security is at stake. So this is our mission. So as an organization, we're really focusing, we're all very aligned to this mission, and this is an extremely strong motivator that bonds the organization together to focus all of our resources and energies to support the acquisition workforce that supports the warfighter by providing meaningful and engaging learning experiences. So the learning here for industry is make sure you make your mission crystal clear, because as actually Ed mentioned, this is a combination of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So an organization that makes their mission crystal clear and simple, again starting with why, Simon Sinek, shows the research shows does much better in engaging employees and motivating them. So when things get tough, you can also always go back to that mission, and that realigns, typically helps motivate employees and realigns them to what needs to be done. The other thing that we see at DAU is leading by example. This is something that we all practice every day, and it's not surprising because a large number of employees at DAU have former military service, so they bring very strong values into the organization. I'm a civilian, and I'm always inspired and motivated by my colleagues because they bring these very, very strong values about commitment and courage and excellence and trust and teamwork that motivate each one of us to work towards that mission.
I want to thank you for joining us today. And before we depart, give each person about a minute or so to kind of your final thoughts, any last minute things that come to mind that you'd like to share with others as they're embarking on their strategies and refining how they're approaching engagement within their organization? Marina, we'll let you, since you started us off.
Thank you, Nicole. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed hearing from Ed and Rachel from their perspectives. What I wanted to leave our participants with is the quote from Peter Drucker, who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you really want to focus on the culture. The internal culture is going to drive how we deal with our customers, and it actually will drive the bottom line. And so based on that, I encourage our participants and each one of us to actually think about what are we going to do differently when we go to the office tomorrow, and how can we be more engaging and kinder towards our colleagues, and more focused on our mission. And with that, I will turn it over to Ed. Thank you.
Great. No, I also appreciated everyone's thoughts. It was a pleasure to be here. It's always great to be in a community of lifelong learners and what I call the professionally curious too. If you are curious about design thinking, that came up earlier in the poll results, I'm really active on LinkedIn. Please do feel free to reach out and I can share resources with you. And Nicole, thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you, Ed and Marina, for your perspectives as well. What I'd like to leave you with is just a note about emotional intelligence, because more research is coming out about how important emotional intelligence is, for engagement, for bottom line results, for sales. Some companies are hiring just based on emotional intelligence rather than sales experience. So that is really what we specialize in at the Wright Foundation. So, as Ed said, I'm very active as well on LinkedIn. If you're interested in learning more about that or the open book management, I could certainly direct you to some resources. So please do feel free to reach out.
Thank you. And I do not have the January event finalized yet. Still working on the dates with the panelists, and I'll have that announced here soon. But if you have any questions for myself, here's how you can reach me, and we'll be kicking off 2019 with some new programming. If you have any ideas for topics that you'd like to learn more about, please shoot them to me on LinkedIn, by email, or give me a call. And the programming is really set to be engaging, inviting to all. So want to make sure that I get your feedback and build that into the programming. Thank you again, each of our panelists, for sharing your time, and the attendees for participating. Hope you have a great day, a great holiday, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.